I'm David Ringstrom, a CPA in Atlanta, and welcome to the second part of our series, an introduction to Excel macros. In part one, we spent a lot of time working in Excel's macro recorder, and we'll do a little bit with the macro recorder today, but we're going to go beyond the macro recorder and see how we can enhance macros that we've recorded by adding in some decision-making capability. We'll be spending some time in the Visual Basic Editor actually getting our hands on some programming code and writing programming code and enhancing what we've created with the macro recorder. So that's the goal for our time during this part of the series. I'd like to give you some background about the version of Excel I'll be teaching from because the way that we pay for software has evolved over the years. Historically, we bought a perpetual license for software, which meant that we would pay once for the software and then use it as far into the future as we would like. But things have evolved and more software is being purchased or licensed on a subscription basis. And so that's why Microsoft has the Office 365 version. Historically, there hasn't been, not that Office 365 has been around that long, it's been around for a couple of years now, but historically, up to this point, there hasn't been much difference between the Office 365 version and, let's say, Excel 2016 or even Excel 2019. Going forward, though, Office 365 is going to start being dramatically different than what I'm terming the legacy versions of Excel, which are any version of Excel that have a year number in their name. In Office 365, we're going to be getting a new calculation engine, which means that the way that formulas will calculate much faster, we'll be able to do dramatic new things with formulas that previously have required menu commands. And so lots of exciting changes are on the horizon for Office 365. So if you're using an older version of Excel and considering moving to a later, and more current version, rather than following your historical pattern and just getting the Excel 2019, that version of Excel honestly is already obsolete. There are changes coming to Office 365 that will not be added to Excel 2019. The legacy versions of Excel with the year number, those are frozen in time. Those aren't evolving. So the Office 365 version updates sometimes monthly, sometimes a few months go by before they add changes, but it's constantly being improved, and so that's where Microsoft is putting all their efforts. With regard to today's material, if there is anything that I cover that's specific to a version of Excel, I'll bring that to your attention. Most of what I talk about in my presentations, I try to cast a wide net and cover things that are applicable to as many versions of Excel as possible. But obviously at various points, I sometimes need to just cover something that's brand new so that everyone can take advantage of the new functionality. With regard to my training style, you'll see that I will show you everything at least twice. I'll first walk you through it on the PowerPoint slides, which are very detailed and have numbered steps. Then I'll go to the Office 365 version of Excel and carry out those techniques firsthand. The handouts for today do include a PDF of today's presentation as well as the example workbook. Also within that example workbook is a related articles tab that has links to articles I've written that relate to today's material. So I do try to leave you with a lot of takeaways from choosing one of my presentations. First thing we're going to do is to enable a hidden menu that's called the developer menu. And what the developer menu does, it's a hidden menu that has features that make working with macros easier. There's also a command that we can use to create macro buttons on our spreadsheets. Will give us another way to launch our macros when we need to. To enable this developer menu, we will go first to the File menu. Step 2, we're going to go to the Options command. It's going to bring up an Excel Options dialog box, and for most of us, we will choose Step 3, where we'll click Customize ribbon. Then over to the right, Step 4, we'll click the checkbox for Developer. Step 5, we'll click OK. As shown in Step 6, we'll then have a new Developer menu at the top of our Excel screen. If we're still using Excel 2007, instead of clicking on Customize ribbon, which does not exist in that version of Excel, you'll instead choose Popular at the top of the list there. And on that set of popular options, you'll see a checkbox that says Show Developer tab in the ribbon, and then you'll click OK. To see that in Excel, presently there's no developer menu at the top here. If I go to the File menu, and then I come down to the Options command, it puts me in my Excel Options dialog box. So where I next want to go is to customize the ribbon. And in Excel, the term ribbon, that's Microsoft's term for the menu interface that they introduced with Excel 2007. So historically, Microsoft Excel had drop-down menus, and they replaced the drop-down menus for the most part with this new tabbed interface that Microsoft has dubbed the ribbon. Here we can turn on the developer tab by clicking that checkbox. We then click OK. Notice we then have a new menu that has features for working with macros and also XML files, which is beyond the scope of our time today. But over to the left, we'll see that there's a Visual Basic button that's going to enable us to launch the Visual Basic editor. There's a bigger version of our macros dialog box, and so we can get to the macros that we have created. We have a bigger version of the record macro command. So now this is going to give us 3 different ways to initiate recording a macro. We'll still be able to go to the View menu and pull this command down and choose Record Macro, or we'll be able to initiate recording from the Developer menu, or we'll still have the little shortcut down at the bottom if we've used the macro recorder previously. Notice we also have a bigger version of Use Relative References. And what's better about this, when we turn it on, it retains a background. So it's much more obvious that it's on, as opposed to when we go to the View menu and we pull down that macros, just a tiny little border around the outside edge is all that indicates whether we've turned Use Relative References on or off, versus on the Developer menu, much easier to ascertain if we've turned that setting on or off. Also, if we want to get to our macro security settings, one-stop shopping here, we click here, puts us directly in the macro settings in the Trust Center. And so we can then determine, do we want to disable macros with notification? So sometimes Excel gets installed where all the macros are disabled. If it's set to that, we won't be able to run any of our macros. The optimal setting that we want here is this disable all macros with notification. There is a choice down at the bottom that says enable all macros. We want to not use that one. There was a period of a few years where it was safe to do that, but it's gotten in vogue again to try to spread malware to your computer by trying to get you to open up Excel spreadsheets that have malicious code embedded in them. So that's why I want to keep it set to disable all macros with notification, so we can choose by way of that enable content command if we want to enable those macros. So the other command we'll be making use of today on the developer menu is this insert button, where we'll be able to create a macro button to be able to launch our macros. It will just give us yet another way to initiate working with a macro. As we've seen, macros can be used to streamline repetitive tasks. And so for today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on using a feature that often gets overlooked in Excel. It's called the goal seek feature. It's tucked away under the what if analysis. If you've not used the goal seek feature before, what it allows us to do is to solve for a missing input. So let's say that you are shopping for a car and you know the interest rate and you know the term and you know what your ideal payment is. What you're not clear about yet is how much can you borrow. So that's going to be the missing input. We could, if we didn't know about goal seek, we could go in this case to cell B3 and type in different numbers until eventually we got the payment formula to return $500. Let's say if we wanted that to be our payment. Instead, goal seek will solve for us automatically. So Excel will start with 0. It'll put different numbers in cell B3 until eventually the formula in cell B4 returns 500, and then it will stop. So it's easy enough to use, but this is one of those features in Excel that tends to have amnesia. And so every time we go back to goal seek, we have to fill in all 3 fields again. So we're going to use this as an opportunity to record a macro around the goal seek feature. And then along the way, will be a vehicle by which I can show you how we can ask users questions while running a macro. So we'll be creating an input box so that we can ask the user what they want the payment to be. And so that will streamline how the macro runs. Also, we'll see how to create a macro button. So then we don't have to direct the user to go to the macros command on the View menu or the Developer tab to launch the macro. They'll just click the button to initiate the macro. So first, let's get some experience with the goal seek feature, and then we'll tie it in with recording through the macro recorder and then embarking on enhancing that macro.